Hey everyone, Leanne Pilkington here for the very first Courageous Conversations for 2021. We are back. I'm very excited to introduce you to our first podcast, Chandra Clements. I read a story about Chandra in a magazine over the Christmas break, and I reached out to her because I thought you guys would just love to hear her story. So Chandra, hello. Lovely to see you.
Hi, Leanne. Thank you for having me.
Absolute pleasure. Now, tell me a little bit about what you actually do for a living.
So I have specialised for a number of years in looking at getting the best out of people, putting it quite simply. So looking at human performance and how we take someone from today's version of themselves and catapult that forward to a higher version. So whether that be through coaching or business intervention or public speaking, my whole focus is on human improvement.
Right. Okay. And so that would have been an interesting space to find yourself in March of last year, right? When COVID sort of came knocking on the door. Talk to me about when COVID hit, obviously the kind of business that you're in, public speaking, there wouldn't have been too much of that. And even coaching, I'm guessing that a lot of people would have pulled back from everything, at least initially.
Yeah, so a lot of my work's booked in advance, and particularly a lot of it's on site. So I do a lot of work in heavy industry or large corporation where I'm actually working on site. And so one of the problems is that when organisations can't have contractors per se, most of my work was then immediately cancelled because it was high risk. And some organisations did decide to still then do it virtually, but there's a lot of organisations that still prefer that human contact. So a lot of it was shelved, and particularly the public speaking arena, it dried up immediately.
Yeah, it sure did. And you've got young children as well, so that just adds another level of complexity. Tell me, how did the kids cope with everything that was going on?
Well, it was a bit of an interesting series of events because COVID actually impacted my work at the same time as my daughter's kindy was closed. So I had the kids at home with me full time, and at the time I had a 4 and a 2-year-old, and so Tara was then at home with me, and we had this interesting dynamic then of everything that they were doing outside of the home was stopped. So Mummy became the dance teacher, the kindy teacher, the businesswoman, the mum, everything from home. And the kids found that a little bit interesting because Tara had only just started kindy, and the next minute it's closed by this dreaded virus. So I think it was very hard for a 4-year-old to try and process what was going on.
And so tell me the story about how you did help her process what was going on.
Well, it was interesting because I've learnt so much about my career through my children. I passionately believe that they have been one of my best university degrees because they've taught me so much about looking at the world differently and quite simplistically. And Tara was quite disturbed because the kids at kindy were talking about people dying and, this virus, and anyone could get this virus and everyone was going to get this virus. And so she kept sort of saying, when is it going to get you? When is it going to get me? And I obviously had to move quite quickly to allay those fears. And overnight time, we sit in bed and I usually make up bedtime stories. The girls have always been quite interested in that. And I've got a pretty creative imagination. So we were sitting in bed and I started to talk about this character named Rona, being the coronavirus. And she would ask a lot of questions, and I would respond through this storytelling, bedtime storytelling around, there was this, little virus that was knocking on doors, but as long as we kept the doors shut and stayed at home and played hide and seek, Rona wouldn't get us, and eventually she'd stop picking on us and go away. And the kids just loved it. And, it then started to take on different versions. What colour ice cream does Rona eat, and what colour shirts does she wear? And so the more I had to answer these questions, the more this creature then became a real, character. And that was on the Sunday night, and by the Thursday we had a book.
Wow.
So it was quite therapeutic for the children, but then the girls started drawing the pictures to match Mummy's story, which is really how the book then came about.
Yeah, wow. That's just such an amazing story. And particularly because it started in such an organic way, just to try and get the kids less anxious about what was going on. So after the book was written and illustrated in no time flat, then what did you do?
Well, then I have a girlfriend who actually self-publishes books, and I thought, okay, maybe I can self-publish a book. So I started actually Googling, would you believe, how you self-publish a book, and one thing led to another, and I just started dabbling with different software and different options, and I kind of, at this stage, there was no threat because, if I uploaded it to one of these systems and I was the only person that bought it, there wasn't any real problem with that because my whole intention was to allay the girls' fear, and I really wanted to publish the book for a memento for them. Yeah. There wasn't any aspiration to, go and become a author or do anything like that. So keeping it simply, I just thought, well, I'll publish this, and if it all goes to custard, then it doesn't really matter. So
just out of interest, because I'm writing my dad's story at the moment, which is an experience and a half. From self-publishing, you don't have to invest a certain amount of money to get something published.
Well, it depends on how you want to approach it. I think it's an interesting industry because I think in itself, it's very good at marketing that you do. It's very good at convincing people that you need an editor and a publisher and an illustrator and 15 other people. And if you head down that path, unless you're going to come out with something that's going to rival Harry Potter, I'm not really sure how you'd recoup your costs. So, being very wise about this and strategic, once you assess what you have the capability of doing, you then can sort of do a cost-benefit analysis of, what you want to invest. And I was lucky that English has always been a strength of mine. I was really impressed with the girls' illustrations. I knew enough about software, etc., that I could dabble around. And so I just played with it until it was marketable. And so the costs were quite negligible to actually to get it to the final stage. Having said that, now, quite a while down the track, the skills are in a different place. But definitely with that first book, I think we've got to be savvy about the cost efficiency of hiring a team of 7 people for your very first book. It's just, I don't think it's there.
Okay. And so the first book, self-published, then what happened?
Yeah, so I uploaded it and was actually slapped very quickly with a number of "you can't do this" letters from the US. At that stage, they put a block on anything that referenced coronavirus, particularly relating to children. They banned, and so I received a number of "no, you can't do this, and we won't allow it to go to sale." And so I was getting, with the time difference, I was getting these letters late at night that were saying, "No, we won't let you do this." And their reason was that anything that was advising people about coronavirus could be dangerous unless it was from a medical expert. And so I had to keep then going back and saying, but have you actually looked what I'm trying to do?
Read the book.
I'm not trying to, advocate a vaccine or solve, where the virus came from. I'm trying to allay children's fears through the use of children's illustrations, and there really isn't any medical risk. And so I had to actually, there was 3 or 4 official letters that I had to write to try and get over this. And in the end, the powers that be said, no, we still won't allow it. So I had to actually go back and then strip the word coronavirus and COVID out of all of the book.
Oh, okay.
And then it went through. So even though everyone knew what it was about, I had to sort of come in via the back door, which again, relevant for your listeners, is very much about that idea that sometimes we get a no, but it's not really a no.
It's just a not yet, or not this way. Yeah, that's
not in that way.
Yeah, that's a really important point. And so you sorted that out. Then what happened?
so then the book went live, and I was up late. I then put it on multiple platforms, and it had been live for about 10 hours or thereabouts, and I went in to check that I'd put in the correct keywords and a few things, and it came up with a flag that it was a bestseller, and I thought, oh, that's a bit silly.
That's weird. Yeah.
And I just naively assumed that Amazon must actually do that to encourage new authors to feel good about themselves, and it was just so I sort of thought, oh, that's cute, and then I went back out and thought, I better have a look at that. So I actually logged in, not as myself, but as a consumer, and it came up as the number one selling book in health and hygiene for children. And I was like, oh, it's not a joke. And then you can track the sales, and then the sales just went crazy after that. And by the time we got to a week later, it was on the front page of the Bulletin. It was on the Channel 7 News. It was on Channel 10. It was, it was just the craziest 15 days that I can possibly describe.
And so when was that?
That was back in March, April. So
okay, so right at the very beginning. So you really made it happen very quickly.
Well, it turned around really quickly, and so by the time we got to May, the ABC had picked it up. Play School had run an article, and so it really was. I was sort of going, "What is going on here?" And then that made me really sit back and think, what is it that we've touched upon here? What is the actual attraction? Why are people interested? And I started to receive all of this social media mail, basically from mums and from caregivers that was saying, thank you for talking to my children through children and through Tara's illustrations. Yeah,
that's amazing. Such a great story. And so there's been more books since.
Yeah, so then Tara absolutely loved that process, and the fact that they then had a book that they learnt, and they could read back to Mummy, and there was their funny pictures, and there's a picture in there of Mummy going cray cray, and they think that's pretty exciting that's all around the world. And so then they wanted to do more, and so then we then published a series of children's books that are all illustrated by the children, and each one of them touches on a social concept. So the first one is COVID-19, the second one is Christmas under COVID-19 circumstances. That's a Corona Christmas. And then the third one was quite interesting. During the process of all of this publishing, our beloved cat actually passed away, and the girls were struggling with this concept of death. And it was my first time as a mum trying to deal with what that meant for children. And so we then had another book straight after that called Bubbles in Heaven, which is about coping with the idea of grief and loss.
That's fantastic. And so since all this has happened, you were telling me earlier that you have been getting some really strange requests from people wanting to connect out of the US. So the Washington Post, tell me what they've done.
Well, you sort of have this impression, don't you, that if the Washington Post or Windsor Lodge or someone contacted you, there'd be almost like, somebody trumpeting at the front door, but that's not at all how it happens. And so the Washington Post sent me a very benign email, at 2:00 in the morning, my time, and it said, we're going to feature your book in the Washington Post as one of the best children's books of 2020. Can you provide some images? And again, like my Amazon story, I sort of looked and thought, is someone having a scam?
Yeah.
And then I realised it wasn't. So around about the 17th of September, it was featured in the Washington Post, and then Marie Claire magazine picked it up. But in the meantime of all of that happening, a number of children's groups and teaching groups and even the UK Rugby Association had all seen different iterations of the Washington Post, and they were contacting me saying, well, will you do this interview, or can we have a book, or, can we have something else in relation to the story? And then we got to the first week in October, and I got an email from the Royal Palace, the Windsor Lodge, saying that the Duchess of York wanted copies of all the books, and again I was like, this is not really happening, is it? So, so we sent books off. First time in my life I've ever had to work out how to send something to
the Palace
Lodge. And I'm, at the local post office here on the Gold Coast, addressing my mail to the Windsor Lodge and thinking this is just surreal.
Surreal, absolutely surreal. I hope you took a photo of yourself doing that for your socials.
I just, and just even checking the address, because I was like, I can't afford to get this wrong, but I'm pretty sure the post will get it right, won't they? They're not going to send it to a different Windsor Lodge, are they? So,
wow.
Yeah.
I just find the whole thing fascinating that such a simple thing that you started to do for your family back in March has just become such a massive deal. I mean, obviously, with you being a coach, changing direction, pivoting, doing new things is probably a little bit easier for you than for some. But was there ever a time where you sort of sat back and thought, oh, no, I can't do this, I'm not an author?
Oh, look, definitely. I think each one of us suffers a degree of self-criticism and self-doubt, and those are the hurdles in our business story, aren't they? In the fact that when I first received the rejection letter from Amazon, all I thought was, I know nothing about publishing. I know nothing about what I'm doing, and that's it. And I remember actually shutting my laptop and walking away thinking, oh, that was a bit of a shame, and that was a lot of work in a very rapid period of time, but that's over. Yeah. And it was only then, I sort of a few hours later, I thought, well, why does no mean no? And I thought, well, it can't hurt to actually write back to Amazon and say, no, I really do think we should be able to publish this book, and what's it going to hurt? So I think, for the listeners that are thinking about the idea of pivoting, whilst my career and my profession probably lends itself to that being, more possible, I think for each one of us, we're plagued by this idea of no means no, or that boundary is permanent, or we don't have the skills, or that's not our playing field. And the moment you sort of say, well, if I just dabble in it, what is the worst thing that can happen if I try? And I think that's the antecedent to the behaviour that leads to us achieving goals.
Yeah, that's a very coachable moment, isn't it? What's the worst thing that can happen if I just try? I was listening to a podcast over Christmas, and it was Obama's speechwriter. And he said that when he was an intern, somebody said to him, have you ever written a speech before? And he's like, oh, yes, I can do that, no problem. Of course, he'd never written a speech before, but his message is just say yes, and who knows where it's going to, where it can lead. And that's pretty much what you've done.
Yeah, and the personal growth, I have been an executive coach, and I have been working in that corporate space for such a long time, but I'm a much better person now and better at my profession because of this completely crazy diversion into an area that I didn't think I had any skills in. The benefits that I now have that are pouring back into my standard work, but also this, broadening of your mind to, well, I always saw myself as being in this career for the rest of my life, and that's not actually factual, that's self-imposed. And who says that, I now need to be an executive coach when maybe I could, go on and write a screenplay, or maybe I could go on and do something different now. I think it really has opened my idea to this idea of we get stuck in what's easy, we get stuck in what we know, and changing lanes seems scary and seems difficult. Yeah. But if we just actually try a different lane, we might find out that we've got about 15 different skill sets that we haven't even explored.
And we always focus on why not. I know certainly during the beginning of the pandemic in the real estate business that I'm in, there was a lot of restrictions. So we couldn't do open homes, we couldn't do rental inspections, we couldn't do auctions, and everybody was focused on all of the stuff that we couldn't do anymore instead of focusing on the stuff that we still can do. and adapting the things that we can to make it more workable in the situation. So it's interesting, isn't it, that we always look at why not. So particularly women, where we think, oh no, I can't do that. I'm a mum. I've got to look after the kids. That's all going to be too hard. I can't take that financial risk. We look at all the hurdles rather than looking at how we can actually get around them.
Yeah, Leanne, I think it is so important for us to, again, think in the minds of our children, and how do you eat an elephant one bite at a time? And if we look at, this mammoth task of publishing a book, most people would see that as laborious, cost-consuming, difficult, finicky, not possible. But if you just sit down and put pen to paper and a couple of words, and then think about how you could do it yourself, or how you could find people to help you low cost, or if you just start taking those incremental steps, before we know it, we're 1.5 kilometres along the journey, and now it seems very, very possible. So I think that first, 10 choices that you make around how could this be done, even if we're thinking fantastically, how is it possible that I could become a real estate agent, or how could I be an author, or how could I go back to university, or how could I, start my own cafe? If we just start with the really simple first steps and just allow ourselves to dabble in that space for a moment, I think women can really get themselves started, and before we know it, we've actually got something very sustainable and achievable before we have invested too much at all.
It's such incredibly good advice. Thank you so much for taking the time to be with us. Obviously, I was just another one of those random strange people that reached out to you via LinkedIn after reading about you in a magazine, but I so appreciate you taking the time. I just love the story, and I know that that all of my listeners are going to as well. So thanks so much for being here.
Thank you so much, Leanne. That's just wonderful, and I'm so glad we could catch up today.